So do you think the MSI Katana GF76 handles Marvel's Spider-Man? Well, we're going to find out today. Hey guys, and welcome back to another video, and today we're going to check out Spider-Man on the MSI Katana GF76 11UD, and we see if we can get at least 60 FPS out of it. And we're going to start as usual by checking out the system requirements for this game. So for the minimum specs with very low graphics settings to get 30 FPS at 720p, we need a GTX 950 or an AMD equivalent. I'm not sure which one that would be on the top of my head, but on the CPU side we need an i3 4160 or AMD equivalent. I believe an FX processor should handle this, and 8 gigs of RAM. And for the recommended specs, to get 60 FPS at 1080p in medium settings, we need an 1066 GB or an RX 580, and it's pretty safe to say that we can clear this with an i5 4670 or a Ryzen 5 1600 with 16 gigs of RAM, and the CPU is no issue here. And in the very high specs, to get 60 FPS at 4K with very high graphics settings with an RTX 3070 or an AMD Radeon RX 6800 XT or an i5 11400 or a Ryzen 5 3600. And here we have an i5 11400H, so it's pretty good there, and 16 gigs of RAM. So I believe we will be right in the middle of recommended and very high specs. And for the amazing ray tracing, when to get 60 FPS at 1440p or 30 FPS in 4K with a high ray tracing high settings, we need an RTX 3070 or an RX 6900 XT, and we're pretty screwed there. With an i5 11600K or an Ryzen 7 3700X, which we don't have, with 16 gigs of RAM that we have. Or for ultimate ray tracing, 60 FPS at 4K for high-end ray tracing, very high graphics settings with an RTX 3080, RX 6950 XT, and we're screwed there already. Or an i7 12700K or a Ryzen 9 5900X, also quite screwed there, with 32 gigs of RAM, and we are mega screwed. So what are we waiting for? Let's get right into the game and see how well this laptop can handle it. So here we are in the beginning, and it shouldn't matter that much. So let's see what we can do. And it is. Now we're running at high settings without DLSS, and it gets pretty good. I mean, 70 FPS approximately. It's quite nice. So let's land right here and see what happens if we turn on DLSS. Let's get a quick difference. There was not an immediate difference, but it's still over 60 FPS, and I like it. Oops. This is actually really playable. So let's go back. Now we're in an area where something is happening. Let's go back with no DLSS or FSR. Should I be daring and put on some ray tracing? Test this out. still over 60, but it's still just a cutscene, so... Okay, now it got lowered. Now we're getting to some fight and... Bam, bam. Let's try and let's run with both DLSS and ray tracing. It's not that bad. It's actually pretty good. Little frame drop there. Or a quite big one. So I'm going to test this some more off camera and do all of the benchmarking and see how well it performs. So I'll see you once it's done. So for the graphical settings, I ran it in 1080p with high preset, zero motion blur and no VSync. And when I ran the game with ray tracing enabled, it was set to high, and when I used DLSS it was set to quality. So let's see how it went. As you can see, the FPS was not that bad at all. Without DLSS and without ray tracing, we got an average of 77.8 FPS, and the 1% low was at 49.5 FPS. Then I applied DLSS with a quality setting and got an average 72.9 FPS, which is a bit lower, but the 1% lows got up to 50.8 FPS compared to 49.5 that we got without DLSS. After this, I went ahead and applied both DLSS and ray tracing. DLSS was set to quality and ray tracing was set to high. This time the performance took a hit with an average frame rate of 47.5 and a 1% low of 13.1. With an RTX 3050 Ti GPU, it was quite expected, to be honest, but it was still fun to see what this GPU is capable of. Apart from the occasional stuttering and drops, it was pretty smooth playing Spider-Man with this GPU. So now, would you play Marvel's Spider-Man on this laptop? Let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you all very soon in the next one. We're going to check out Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales.